Pastor Bill, Father Ted, Go Bill, Go Wrede. Good to be with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to
Good.
see you this morning, Tyler.
Yeah,
It's been a while.
it has been.
We saw each other much more frequently until both of us became parish pastors.
I know. I was thinking about that on this morning before I actually when I admitted you into the into the room here. But I was like, man, I was trying to remember what my first interaction with you was, and I think I remember, if I remember correctly, I had two of my best friends who stood in my wedding, Adam and Kevin, were at Concordia in Ann Arbor, and they were doing something with you where you came to visit and you took a bunch of the pre-sem guys out to one of my favorite restaurants, Sidetrack in Ypsilanti, right? So this episode might as well be sponsored by Sidetrack in Ypsilanti. The amount of times that you and I have spent there over those years.
Yep.
And Kevin and Adam, even though I wasn't technically pre-sem at the time, they were like, why don't you come with us? Like, come meet Bill Wrede. I was like, okay. So I went. I'm pretty sure that was the first time that I met you.
I think so too.
And I discovered quickly that you are a huge Michigan fan, which was a check mark plus in my book. And so I wore one of my Michigan shirts for you with this. I don't know if you can see it. I forgot to show you this before. Can you see the back?
Nice.
Just to remind everybody that Michigan is 2-0 in the last 2 years against Ohio State by a combined score of, what is it, like 73 to 30 something. So
But
anyway,
each
so
game is important. Let's not lose track here.
that's right. That's right. Well, but also back-to-back Big Ten champions. So
Yep.
so I just realized this. I have my one of my big house water cups too.
I feel like a slouch because I'm not sporting anything, obviously. So
That's all right. Well, you're in Iowa now, so you're in enemy territory. So you're in Iowa. Talk a little bit about your congregation a little bit. How'd you end up in Iowa, and are you enjoying being back in the parish?
So I had been at Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Albany, New York, just prior to this. That was my first intentional interim placement. And then in November, I accepted a call here just last year. So I started here January 1. Denison is a town of about 8,000 people in far western Iowa, right in the middle, about an hour and a half north of Omaha, an hour and a half south of Sioux City. And we're just kind of out with the pigs because the two major manufacturers in town are hog production for bacon and hams and such. But then also we have an ethanol plant, because you might not know this, Tyler, but Iowa has corn. So corn is used for everything. So Denison is a relatively rural town. It has more hills than other parts of Iowa because we're closer to the Missouri River. Zion is a congregation that obviously has an intentional interim. They went through some struggles because of a pastor and the members of the congregation had a vision for a new building for the church, new building for the school. And there were other people that were like, we can fix this building. We can stay here. So after that conflict, then I came here in January, and we're working through that. The grieving process also of the school a year ago was authorized to pursue becoming a recognized service organization of Synod. So the school's still Missouri Synod, but instead of being Zion again for 139th year, it's actually independent. It's not an association with Zion or the other congregations in the area, but it's a standalone. So there's been a lot of transition going on. And so that's part of the reason why I'm here.
Are you is part of your call to help like navigate through all these changes? Like, is that
right?
And has that been tough because I think sometimes I was just having a conversation with Pastor Hill about this the other day. Pastors, I think sometimes the job description can sometimes get confusing to the sense of congregations that call a pastor, the sole purpose of a pastor is, as we learned at the seminary, is to preach the word and to properly and rightly administer the sacraments, right? And in a sense, that makes our job incredibly easy to deliver over the goods, so to speak, right? To preach forgiveness, to preach love, the love of Christ, and to lead people in their faith journey. And there are certainly difficult parts of that, but I also think that part of it that isn't always included. Like, I don't think the seminary ever taught me how to transition, help a congregation transition to the extent where you're at. And so, like, how has that been for you as far as, like, as you're coming in as an intentional interim with no knowledge whatsoever of this congregation other than what has been told to you? So what you're trying to learn the congregation, you're trying to get to know the people, all while you're helping them, like, make this move.
Yep.
Has that been difficult for you?
Well, it's part of the beauty of intentional interim training is that it prepares you to do what we do. So on one hand, you're definitely still you're the called, installed parish pastor, but also you have a very unique list of goals, of accomplishments that are expected because of being an interim. And the goal is that by being intentionally an interim, we can help a congregation, we can help congregations, schools, camps, so forth, not have an unintentional interim where somebody comes in after a long pastorate, after trouble, whatever, and they burn through that pastor relatively quickly because of all that's still up in the air, upheaval, hurt, grief. So we come in with a very unique approach of needing to get to know the congregation very quickly. I will be here maybe a year and a half to 2 years. I've been here 6 months so far. And so there's things that are expected because you're preparing for a smooth landing for what we call a settled pastor, not interim, but the guy that'll stay here, and to help them process through things before they call him. And part of that is for the first several weeks, I interviewed and anybody was welcome to do it. I didn't pick the people, 40 individuals, 40 plus people at over 45 minutes each, sometimes several hours. It depends on where the conversation went. You listen, you listen to what happened, I'm not looking for the gory details of the split and a breaking off of another congregation. But what is it that has happened internally? What's happened to them? What is their vision still for Zion? And to help capture that in a way, because not in a way, but the goal is that change will happen from within, that you're helping lead them to use their resources, use their vision to come up with a very dynamic and intentional way of moving forward with a pastor. So you come in and a lot of time spent listening, which the other thing is that, I like to talk and, but I am relational. So part of that relationship is that I do listen. And so a lot of listening and processing so that you don't just get what was on paper with your call documents and some interim stuff, but you get to hear individual stories and start, developing a plan that then goes into next steps as far as how are we going to bring this out. Part of it is being a pastor, offering them the stability and everything that they're looking for, but also processing some of the other changes, and depends on the congregation how you do that.
Yeah. How is that? So how do you balance, like, what is, like, when you wake up in the morning and you head into obviously you're not in your office, I don't think that's your
Nope.
house.
I'm at home. Yeah.
Like, so you're like, when you go into your office, I mean, how much time is spent working through, helping them to create this vision and lead them through this, as opposed to, like, hey, I have a sermon to write on Sunday.
Right.
And like, I have a Bible study. You guys have like a midweek Bible study or something like that happens too, or Sunday morning Bible study that you prepare for too. Like, how do you, I guess my question is it seems like to me, as a pastor who does not have to navigate through things like that, Family of God and St. Stephen have their own sets of challenges. But and I I actually just found myself doing this on Saturday. It's like I had a really long week last week and I was like, oh crud, I still have a sermon to write. But like, and that's why they've called me, is to preach and to teach, and while still doing all the other stuff that you had helped to describe, especially with interim ministry. But how do you balance that? It seems like that'd be, especially with interim, and I think the challenge, I think too, might be knowing that you're not going to be there for
Yeah.
that long. Like, too, does that make sense? Like, is that
Yep.
something that you struggle with, like in your preaching and in your leading and in your listening? Like, I feel like, because I remember when I was on internship, I was told by my supervisor, who's no longer actually in the LCMS. But he told me, he said, don't get too close to some of the people here, because you're going to be leaving. And I told him that I thought that was good advice to a point. I didn't want to be completely distant, but I do understand what he meant by that. And it was just one of those things where, for you, knowing that you said a year and a half to 2 years, and when they get this new guy, like, how do you balance the relationship? How does that affect your preaching and teaching and all that? Or does it?
Well, one of the things that happens with having an interim is that you interrupt their homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
We've always had this. They've had a long pastorate. They had a shorter term pastor, but I come in as who I am. So
Yeah.
I do things, and I sometimes have to caution them that as much as you might like that I do this, it doesn't mean the next guy will. But helping them to think about embracing the individual, embracing Jesus. When you have an argument over the importance of a building, and I'm just not a brick and mortar guy, because I've been in so many different places. Probably the last brick and mortar building that I have a romantic view with is still the chapel at Concordia, Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
That was in so many ways very important to me, both for worship and for meditation and for Boar's Head and everything.
Yeah.
So I understand that, but especially in a small town where everybody's kind of related, and some people have been here since God created the soil. And so it's hard. It's hard to help people understand that I'm here to bring you Jesus. I am here. A lot of people will lead off with how long they've been here, baptized, confirmed, married, everything happened here. But how do we welcome in that new person, the person that doesn't have any connection to anybody in the congregation?
Right.
They're here to see Jesus, like your building. Just, it's what my thing is, though, is wanting to see Jesus. Part of that too is you open the system, and by that, another way that we would say that is identifying the elephants in the room, so that when you have a system, if you will, something that is not healthy, that you kind of name it and claim it, you bring it out, you talk about it, you address it. Sometimes that's one-on-one with people. Sometimes it's behavior at a voters meeting. Sometimes it's restructuring the way we conduct ourselves in general, so that we're kinder to one another. As an interim, you come in because you have the freshest eyes in the place.
Yeah.
You're not from here. You've not even served in this district before. So everything that happens is the same way that a visitor would see it, in that I'm going to see it a little bit more for exactly what it is. So in doing that, you still have to structure it so that you get all your other work done. I'm a front loader. I try to do certain things at the beginning of the week, so that as the week progresses, I still have, I get all the essentials done: Bible class, worship, nursing homes, this sort of thing, which even there's some compromise on whether or not you can visit everybody on the standard once a month, or if it has to be spread out, or incorporating other people to do it. And I'm a person that still carries a paper planner.
You're one of those people.
Franklin Covey and I are still good friends.
Yes.
My thing is I don't care what people use, just be organized.
Sure.
But and it's part of the fun of being someplace new is, don't tell me something on Sunday morning because I don't have my other real brain with me.
Right.
To help them understand the different ways that people operate in that. But it's just helpful. It's helpful for them to get to know me. That relational part is always because I'm just not a person that likes people. You've known that since you've met me, Tyler. I just don't like people. Spending time with them is difficult. Uh, Big time tongue in cheek. So I
Yes.
went out with three ladies, probably all somewhere in their 70s, and we had dinner together one night. And you have to be careful because as an interim, you want to continue that freshness. You don't want
Sure.
somebody to, we use that expression, beware those who meet the truck.
Hmm.
Beware those who, are just so wonderful to you. Are they coming in because they want to be wonderful to the new guy on the block, or are they looking for an in? And that's very
Right.
important as an intentional interim, is because uh, there are systems already in place, and I'm not
Hmm.
one of them. So
Right.
that's
Right.
all part and parcel of that balance of making sure you're still doing the word and sacrament ministry of the congregation, but also I'm accountable to the parish planning, the elders, and to the district president to keep moving forward on the
Yeah.
interim side.
Have you had any, like, because I experienced the same thing when I taught at one of our Lutheran high schools this year. One of the principal pulled me into his office and essentially said the same thing that you said. Like, you're coming in with, we said, fresh eyes. You're coming in from a kind of that bird's eye view. You're coming in with no experience with anyone in here, with no predisposition towards anything. Like, it's just like you are here and you see it for what it is. And so
Mhm.
what are the things that we can do better? And I literally was kind of like one of those cartoons where you kind of have the piece of paper and the paper just kind of rolls. It keeps rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. And I was just like, here's some suggestions from my point of view. And they may not even work, and so but there's just a couple things that to consider. Have you had any, like, pushback, like, knowing, okay, you've been trained as an interim pastor, and you've been in parish ministry, you've been in, we'll get to this in just a minute, you've been in the institutionalized ministry, meaning like you worked at the seminary, and did you have any, like, pushback from people, or be like, well, do they call you Pastor Bill, Pastor Reedy,
All of it. Yep.
Father Ted?
Not Father Ted. There's only a couple people. I've told everybody about the Father Ted thing, but most everybody's Pastor Reedy, Pastor Bill.
Yeah. So like, do they ever say, Pastor Bill, like, yeah, we hear you, but you've only been here for 6 months. You've only been here for a couple of weeks. You've only been here for a couple of months. Like, you don't know what it's been like. Like, have you had anything like that
Oh,
coming
yeah.
in?
Absolutely. What you're always going to have, and whether you're an interim or just the new guy, there's that whole desire to repristinate something from the past. They want an era, a program, they want something to return. Um, and because of COVID and some other things, like they used to have three women's groups, Evening Guild, I think it was Evening Guild, Dorcas, and whatever it was, they become one. So that's a change. There's a desire. We have about 175 to 200 people in worship every Sunday at one service.
Okay.
There's a desire for a Saturday night service. And, some people that have good reason. Some of it is because we've always had one. The other thing is that is Saturday night going to serve people that can't come on Sunday? Would Wednesday afternoon, or, there's just different ways that you can look at things to back off far enough that you can find out why. Why do
Hmm.
we want to do this? The pushback, it comes from some very different ways. Like, I got pushback because a certain group thought that it's always been that the pastor does our devotion. Well,
Hmm.
at first, their meetings were on my day off, and with one day off, I am extremely careful that I
Yeah.
don't compromise my Sabbath to come in, and to doing a devotion is extremely easy. You can use other people's stuff, but
Right.
in my mind, breaking that, and also to help them understand that maybe, my thing has always been church council, elders, and voters. But as far as other committees and stuff, I don't necessarily go to trustees or to stewardship or to whatever. You're in an advisory capacity. And when it's been done differently before, and all of a sudden you're saying no,
Yeah.
no can be a complete sentence.
Hmm.
Grammarians would argue with me, but no sometimes
I
has
don't
to
think any of
stand by it.
them listen.
Huh?
I don't think any grammarians listen.
Oh, okay, yeah, they're watching, they're not reading. Um,
Right.
Turn on the captions, practice reading. But
Right.
it's just kind of, and that's the part that doesn't offend me or challenge me too much because it's part of what we need to do here. One of the ways to look at it is that if we repristinated the past, we might get, a handful of people that'll just groove on that. But what is going to help people see Jesus? And what are people thinking? And without getting into the weeds of specifically Zion, but they have a desire to have more of a welcoming narthex where people can
Mm,
be about, and there's a congregation in the area that has a beautiful narthex. Or what if, because it's our chancel is very deep and it's hard for senior citizens to walk up to the altar to commune,
yeah.
what if we move the rail down to the main floor? Or what if we increase the lighting? There's things like that that
Yeah.
sometimes get pushed back because it's change.
Yeah.
I joke that most churches have sacred dust.
Mm,
We don't change even the dust because there's something we're afraid. We're afraid we're going to lose the stability. And if we keep focusing them on the message, on Christ, on the salvation that is He won for everybody, and
right.
that's just one more quick thing is that I call it scrapbooking to encourage people to recognize history, to recognize
Yeah.
the past, to say, you've got this beautiful scrapbook. Who helped
Mhm.
you to create that incredible history
Yeah.
and very involved here at Zion? What can we do to help others now so that when they become your age, that they can say, oh, I have this beautiful scrapbook and I've been helping so-and-so. When those scrapbooks were just a really big deal, people would get together and do scrapbooks together because it was such a part of that culture. And I think that's where I am as a parish pastor, specifically with interim, is helping to open up new scrapbooks so that other people can have that baptism, confirmation, wedding, that
Yeah.
that moment here with Jesus.
Yeah. I've never thought about that. I might actually consider that with one of our congregations because they're kind of stuck in that same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we had someone that had literally brought in they never imagine this, they never had a Paschal candle in the time that we had been there. And so we had a student guy that was kind of working with us, and he bought one because he's just really into church history, really into church symbolism and all that. And we've talked to him before about, hey, make sure that we appreciate that your eagerness and your love for these kinds of things, but let's just communicate with the pastor because we want to know what's happening so that when something shows up in the church, we actually know where it came from and why it's here.
Right.
Because he had brought a Paschal candle, and you would have thought that it was, I mean, it was like all hell broke loose. What is this doing here? We've never had this before. Um, same thing with those. You remember, like in the really, it sounds like maybe Zion has the hymn boards that have
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah. So someone had told him that well, we don't use the hymn boards anymore, and so he took that as, well, I'm going to take them down and just move them, and that was a big time no no. And we that I mean that really irritated the congregation, that really irritated him, it irritated us. And so we ended up having a big come to Jesus meeting with everybody. And come to find out, it had that doing that in secret had actually opened up some wounds from that congregation from a while ago. And so it made sense that they were doing. It wasn't one of those things where they were upset at change for the sake of change, because I think sometimes we can do that too, where like you can make change almost an idol,
Yep.
where you change just because, for the sake of change. But at the same time, there needs to be, if change is going to help you, like you said, if change is going to help people in your congregation or people outside your congregation that are coming in, it allows them to see Jesus, right? Some Greeks came and said, we wish to see Jesus, right? I mean, that's in Jesus, okay, my hour is here, right? So people are coming to see Jesus. And so that's the hour is there for Jesus to be present amongst his people in a very different way, because we know that he's always with his people, but in a much different, more intimate way, right, in the preaching and in the sacraments. And so if there's different things like moving the altar rail that allows the senior citizens to come in and receive Jesus in that way, that's something that can be considered as well. So you've gone through, you've been in at Zion for six months. You were at Our Savior Albany for what have that been, about a year before that then?
15
Ish,
months.
15 months. But before even that, we were just mentioning you used to, my first interaction with you was on a sounds like you were like recruiting for for like college sports, on a recruitment trip where you bought burgers for everybody, right? And but that's what you did for Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. You were the recruiting guy. You were doing some admissions work and things like that. I guess my question is, without getting into too much detail, for the sake of Eighth Commandment, for the sake of respect for the brothers, even though we may not agree with some of the things that happen, they're still brothers in Christ. They're still so people that God can use, and so I do want to be mindful of that. I also don't want to get you in trouble. But is there any light that you can shed as to how it was that your time? How was your time at Concordia? That transition out, and do you miss that kind of the institution that side of ministry, because that's just as important as it's a different role, I guess, that God uses to build up his church, as you were recruiting young men to go to the seminary and become pastors.
Yeah,
What
maybe
was that
some of
transition?
my experiences have helped me pre-intentional interim training. I was very resistant to going to the seminary to work because I was in a parish in Queens, New York, and I had the call in hand and was invited to be interviewed and then to talk to people I wanted to. And Pastor Bob Hayner, whose two sons are still active pastors, Bob is retired. I went into his office because he had been involved with the district in Michigan, parish pastor, this, that, and the other thing. And I was concerned about coming to the seminary and losing the relationships of being a parish pastor. And he assured me that every year, as at that time he was placement director, he was pastor to the 70 or whatever number of men and deaconess students that he was placing. And that had always stayed with me, that was what made going there. And I think Bob, even though he didn't know me super well, knew enough of me, maybe through his sons, that it was a good fit. It was great. I loved building those relationships with prospective students. I loved getting to know programs inside and out, and the things that you just need to communicate so somebody can make an informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed that. I didn't mind the travel. I didn't mind. There was such a balance because you're on campus for a while, you're traveling for a while, you get to go to these Concordias, you get to try to ferret out who is interested. And that was so important because of having been at the seminary as a student and so on, that making connections with guys that I knew to help find the next generation. I really enjoyed that. It was kind of funny because I had different supervisors over time, and we had different relationships. We had different opportunities that sprouted up because sometimes having a doorway meeting and being told, no, you don't have to take that to the faculty, that'd be stupid, because it was just not a faculty issue. This is
Right.
something that the provost can decide. This is something that can be done. And I'm biased because I spent most of my years working with Dr. Dale Meyer, and the team effort that we had, including a recruitment trip to Concordia, Wisconsin, where he almost got on board his flight that left earlier than mine with my rental car keys, and had to send a student
Awesome.
back down to Mitchell Airfield to get my car keys so I could go turn my car in. There was a relationship with that. And when the Gospel Mark was going around with their presentation, all those relationships were great, different pre-sem directors. And it was obvious that I probably stayed as a recruiter longer than most would. I was there for 10 years total. And as somebody who at that time would have been in my later part of my 50s. New things were, and talk about the changes within a congregation. I knew what worked for me. I didn't necessarily have insight into some other areas. I was cautious about them. So when the opportunity came then to move on, it was a good thing. I have no regrets of my 10 years at Concordia. There was some incredible times. I mean, I got to meet you. We got to sit down
Yes.
in a church, and I don't want to disclose our confidential conversation, but to wrestle with residential versus SMP and who you are and family, that was the kind of stuff I loved,
Yeah.
because even though there was, I mean, really, I didn't recruit for the distance programs, but you talk to guys all the time.
Right.
Those were the parts that I appreciated, was that I was challenged at times to get to know a guy well enough, to get to know his sense of vocation well enough. And those are the things that I definitely took with me from the seminary, was those relationships, that kind of bond. I miss it in that some of the guys now, the last group that I was actively recruiting that were on campus before I left, they're coming back as fourth year this year.
Fourth years. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So it's been a blast keeping in touch
Yeah.
with them and hearing how vicarage has gone and stuff like that. So I'm glad that has continued, and the number gets smaller. But then I was at the National Youth Gathering, and it was, let's see, that was last year. So I was in Albany. I was at the National Youth Gathering assisting with registration. And it was very obvious that I'm running into a lot of people that I knew. And it was just kind of all of a sudden somebody said, well, if you were there for 10 years, and we'll just say that 60 new students came in a year, there's 600 guys out in the field that you know. No wonder why you know half of the people that are walking through the line. And that was a part of seeing the fruit of your labors, knowing that somewhere, some Sunday school teacher, a parent, a pastor, or somebody. But kind of the cool thing, and I'll just say this before I let you talk again, is that to go from the mindset that most of our guys, well, for one thing, the majority don't come from families where their dad was a pastor. Then the balance between how many came from a Concordia. The thing that I think is so cool about recruitment were those who had more recently come to faith. And some of them only became Missouri Synod because they were Googling and studying and reading, and finally found out that this denomination was where they wanted to be. That to me was just mind blowing. To know even like Pat Ferry, the president emeritus of Wisconsin, was an adult convert. He became Christian in college. So those kind of things get very exciting for me because of the fact that I didn't go to a Lutheran school. My first Lutheran school was Concordia College in Ann Arbor. Those kinds of things are beautiful memories because of seeing the hand of God in the whole thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I still remember. I remember the shock. I was surprised, not because I didn't believe in you, but because I knew at the time you were in St. Louis, and I just was like, hey man, I'm getting ordained. Like, if you just happen to find yourself in this area in January, and then I actually don't think you said anything back. And I was like, okay, so I didn't expect you, and then all of a sudden I show up, and in walks Bill Wrede to robe up and be there for my ordination. That was such a really cool experience to me, and for that, I think that speaks to the not just the level of our relationship, but the relationship that you have with these other men that you've recruited to the seminary, you got to know at the time that you were there, and it's just one of those things. I'm a big advocate of. I mean, relational ministry is, if you don't have a relationship with the person, I mean, it's going to make ministry really, really tough. And so, I mean, there's a lot of men I know out there. I was just talking with a good friend of mine, good friend of the podcast, brother Zach Seralt, and so he's. I know he thinks very highly of you also, and a lot of these, you see it's kind of like a web, right? And you got this person's connected to this person, and this person's connected to this person's connected back to this person who knows this person who knows this person, right? And so the Lutheran world is just, it's one of the more unique things I think about I mean, it gives a whole new meaning to the word synod and being together, and it's just a cool thing. So was that then a difficult transition outside of like going from that to, and maybe that's not the right question to ask. Is it? I guess, like, has it changed you, like, kind of what happened? Has it changed your view of institutional ministry? I guess, if that is that the right way of
Yeah.
saying that?
Well,
Yeah.
especially in an election year within Synod, I think where our radar is more sensitized to some of the things that trouble us. And for me, it's such a Matthew 18 across a very broad, the way we care for one another, the way we care for each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, because some of the people that I've had contact with are no longer rostered.
Mhm.
That there's people that, well, and you've interviewed people on your podcast. There are people that have chosen to leave the ministry. Some of them have had to leave the ministry. That to me is still part of who we are as a synod.
Yeah.
It's some people would talk about the dirty underbelly or whatever, but there's part of that's where I think our vulnerability has to be so much more vulnerable, is that we need to be aware of where the body of Christ is. That when somebody's suffering because they've had to make a tough decision, they've had a rough time, the placement process, none of it is perfect. We go in with our best intentions, but
Mhm.
humans are involved. I don't believe artificial intelligence would change any of that,
Yeah.
because we're people. We're people that were gifted by God. But that's the hard part, is when you leave a ministry, there's always going to be grief.
Yeah.
Grief for the people that were there, people that do the leaving. So that was the way it was for me. But then it also kind of got my radar up a little bit, or my antenna up for um, guys that were just recently ordained, that were already having major struggles, guys that
Yeah.
were leaving parishes, were getting a leave of absence and so on. So I wonder, in a way, if sometimes my struggles help me to be more sensitized,
Mm.
that when I would hear through the grapevine, well, did you hear he left that parish, or whatever else is going on? That was, in a way, the world would say misery loves company, but it wasn't a chance for us to get together and vent. It was an opportunity for us to connect by phone or
Sure.
messages by Facebook, or however, that we were able to communicate with one another in a way that there was no shame.
Mhm.
That we're always going to feel a bit of shame no matter what went wrong with a decision we made. But to be able to come along other side, people know you're okay.
Mhm.
That's the part that is so hard within the church, is if we have to keep up appearances that are just not there. And I was used to it at one level, because there would be people that I was recruiting wherever along the line. It might be that they were not seen by the admissions committee or districts or whoever was recommending them, to be along and to help them realize that it's not like, okay, you're off my list, you're done. To this day, sometimes I'll get an inquiry from somebody wanting to ask about something, and generally they need to just call the seminary. But it's that part of us as a body that goes, oh yeah, I remember. One of the things that we sometimes say paper cut. I don't know if you've ever had it where your fingernail separates from the skin, like right at and it's
Yes,
like
it's
such a minor thing. But
yes.
if it seems to be minor to us, the person owning that pain right now hurts.
Yeah.
Um, and just this last spring, just right around Easter, Pastor Andrew Johnson, who was serving in Manila, he had
Mhm.
had cancer
Yeah.
earlier on. And when it got closer, what a beautiful time to spend with him, where we didn't have to talk about cancer. We didn't have to talk about death. We would get together and talk.
Yeah.
And he was only about a half hour from here. That to me is part of our being a pastor and a brother, is those times when we just continue on those walks, even when it's different, which is kind of, with the whole thing with the podcast theme and looking at these challenges is going out of our comfort zone to say, brother, you make me nervous, but I'm going to come alongside and walk with you a while, because sometimes we need to give respite care to family and to elders and other people, because we have that bond, whether it's through the recruitment process that started with us, or
Right.
other times as well.
Yeah, I first of all, I didn't realize that you were that close to Andrew. That was, if you're not familiar with that, Andrew, he's, how long has it been since the Lord called him home?
Just before Easter, I think
Just
it was.
before Easter.
I don't remember. It was because his funeral was right after Easter, but I don't
Yeah, that's
remember
right.
exactly
That's
when
right.
he died.
That's
But,
right. Because I believe his wife had posted that he had passed during Holy Week, and how actually, like, the timing of that was like, I get chills, thinking about that, just how the Spirit works in that way. Just how beautiful it was that it happened, on during the week that we celebrate what Jesus did for us, and because of that, and I didn't realize that you were able to do that with him. It was a remarkable story to follow. I mean, he took every minute that he had to proclaim Christ to people, and to use that suffering as an opportunity actually to witness. And that's pretty awesome that you got to walk alongside him like that. That's pretty sweet. I didn't realize that. That's awesome. But to your point
we kept
too
on
about
trying to bless him, and he kept on blessing
I
us. It
know,
was
I
just like,
know, I know,
doggone it.
right?
Yeah,
I know. Well,
his shovel
isn't
was bigger. He kept
I
on just
know,
shoveling it back in a beautiful way.
right? Yeah, well, that's how visits often work, right? I mean, I just visited one of our ladies in the hospital yesterday, in between services, and it was the same kind of deal. I mean, it's often when you go and do a hospital visit or a home visit, I would say 9 times out of 10, the pastor is the one that walks away being blessed
Yeah.
by listening, and I think most pastors would agree with that. To your point too about the Matthew 18 thing, and the stuff that comes up within ministry. And I've heard a lot of people, first of all, if you're listening and you don't know the Matthew 18 model, it's basically, if brother Bill has done something to hurt me, or is in sin, or and there's something that he's doing that I believe needs to be called to repentance, it's the approach to this is, one, I go to him first. This is how Jesus teaches it. I go first. And then if he still refuses to repent, then, or doesn't see it, I shouldn't say refuses, but still can't see it, then you bring 2 to 3 others, and then at that point you bring it before the congregation. And so, but it's all done with love, and it's all done with the purpose of calling to repentance. Would you say that's an accurate assessment of that model? And so, someone asked me one time, why is the church so mean sometimes, or why is the church so broken, or why is the church this or that? And my answer, it's pretty standard, and it probably is going to seem very it's just like a platitude, I guess. The church is full of sinners. Like, at the end of the day, even your pastor is a sinner. He is a he's someone who makes mistakes over and over and over again. Your board president, somebody who makes mistakes over and over and over again. The men who are at the seminary right now, doing the teaching and the administration, they're all sinners. And that's been the case from my time there, from the generation before me, and throughout generations. This world is run by sinners. Now, God is in control, right? But with the people that God entrusts to these situations, we're sinful people, and that can sometimes create some really tough situations. And you kind of know what that's like. You're kind of on the butt end of that.
Well, that's the part that even here, it was most of us, if we took it out of the context of being interim and all this stuff, I had grieved somebody. I had sinned by not considering a decision in light of somebody else's role. And I appreciated it that they came and talked to me, because I could be dismissive and say, get over it or something like that. But I hurt them. And
Yeah.
that was the part that was so important for me, was to have them love me so much that they wanted this relationship to continue and were willing to talk to me about something relatively minor. They probably could have just blown it off too, but it helped me then to also grow in making sure that communication
Right.
happens better, that we keep a broader circle, we keep more people involved so that people have ownership in decisions and everything else that grew from that. So sometimes that little pain that we've caused or has been we've been hurt, it's when we address that, boy, the healing that can happen is just
Hmm.
tremendous.
Yeah, yeah, I've experienced that in my own life, with big things and with little things. I mean, even my wife and I are learning this. I mean, we've been married for 4.5 years, and whenever I do something stupid, which is quite often, um, she will she's gotten to a point where I think she can say to me, and because the other thing too is, like, there's a certain level of trust that needs to be had too, right? Where like the person that you had sinned against, if he can come to you, and if he has to be able to trust that when he comes to you, that you're going to be willing to receive that, right, and
Mhm,
receive that in
mhm,
the way that
mhm.
it's intended to be. So like if I do something that hurts my wife's feelings, and I may not even think, like you said, "Well, just blow it off, just don't worry about it, like I didn't mean it like that, da, 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 da," but at the end of the day, you still hurt someone. And so, I've gotten to a point where, just like you, like, I appreciate that, because now it helps. Number one, it opens up that line of communication, but number two, it helps me to actually be in a position where, it's kind of like what Luther says in the first of the 95 theses, right? Christian life is one of repentance. Be willing to repent, be willing to acknowledge that you made mistakes. And so, um would you say that you're a better pastor because of your time at Concordia?
Yeah, part of it was the beauty of going into intentional interim is that you go through 12, 13 weeks or whatever online, and then one very intense week with people being trained for intentional interim, and it's pan Lutheran at that point, and being able to hear a little tongue in cheek, but sometimes people might question curriculum review and
Yeah.
things that get added and subtracted from a curriculum and what's required on vicarage and so on and so forth. It was fun because I was not part of the academic staff. I was not part of those decisions, but having to communicate that for all that time, it helped me to self-evaluate and to have a mentor that through intentional interim that was so refreshing to go from recruiting, supporting, da 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 da, to now having to evaluate my skills and what I was doing in light of I had this great foundation from the seminary, but now what do I need to learn at how old was it? 61 years old.
Hmm.
What am I going to learn today that is going to be fresh and new? And so, yeah, that I think, not that I think we should all go through intentional interim training, but that kind of very intentional education to enhance where you are going next was huge. It wasn't like going to a conference where we're going to dissect Matthew with Dr. Gibbs. That would be wonderful. But there's that part of just a whole new skill set on being a good pastor.
Yeah.
The practical side is what hits the road every single day, along with the other theological departments. But that practical part just needed to be sharpened.
Yeah. Well, praise God for your ongoing ministry. I do want to speak a little bit about. We got a little bit of time left, and I want to maximize that. And one of the things is, there's probably a lot of people who I know that are listening that may not know one of the things that I think that you may are you known, like, amongst your circle of friends and amongst colleagues, about what happened with 9/11? Like, is that a thing that like you're known for, that you were one of the first guys that was able to be there and being present at the sites and stuff like that? Is that something that you're like, he's the 9/11 guy? Like, I feel like I don't want to be known as that, but
To a certain extent, because people Google And so, like, even before I got here, people just put my name in, whether it was on Facebook or Google. And I think I don't know if it's called this officially, but you can do a vanity search.
Oh,
So if you really want to know what you can find out about a person, about yourself, Google your name.
Google your
And
name.
different presentations that I'd given in a paper I wrote show up.
Yeah.
So it's out there. People know about it. I don't lead with it, but sometimes people will
Ask
introduce
about
me
it.
that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
So I, so that
in
I
the
say all
time.
that I say all that because I want to I want you to talk about it. I want
Yeah,
to I want because I think it's fascinating. The bits and pieces that I've heard from different parts when you spoke about it at Concordia a couple of years ago. You were actually on, I think it was on Fox 2 News. They did a segment
yeah.
or something here while you were at Concordia on a recruitment trip, and I don't think they didn't do the entirety of your story justice, but you were serving in, you said Queens, right? When
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
serving in Queens, and then the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001 happened, and you responded. God called you to respond to all that.
well, and the humorous part is that around that same time, I was the first on the scene for when one of our churches in Brooklyn was on fire. I rode out Katrina with the National Youth Gathering staff in New Orleans, and I think there's another disaster in there somewhere. So I was known for a while as the disaster pastor. So it was risky to stay anywhere near me at times because it seemed like I was in this mode.
It's
But
amazing that you
yeah,
still have friends.
so at the time I was serving two congregations for the deaf and a school for the deaf on Long Island. The one church was in Queens near LaGuardia Airport. The other one was in Harlem, which is Upper Manhattan, 145th Street. So I had been there a year and had been in and around the city enough, both for ministry as well as just because I was exploring. So I was very familiar with it, been in the World Trade Center, all this kind of stuff. So on that Tuesday, it was just a odd thing that it was on the news. And I called our district office to talk to our district president because I didn't know, was this a time when you try to help out or do you stay out of the way, this sort of thing. And he hadn't even heard yet what had happened. So I had to fill him in on that. And then he said, if you can get in, go. So I did. And it was all a chain of events that in hindsight was pretty cool. That, like, going in on the Long Island Expressway from Long Island, where I lived at that time, the Long Island Expressway is referred to as the world's longest parking lot. Doesn't move. That day, I chose not to take a train because I'd already heard theirs being shut down. That getting on the expressway, I did that thing that's illegal. There's several illegal things that I did. One was
And
following closer than 500 feet behind an emergency vehicle.
aha.
And so, as long as my Corsica would go, we went. And I got to just about to Manhattan when they were signaling everybody had to get off the road unless you had flashing lights. So I parked the wrong way on a one-way street, and I could see from that vantage point the Twin Towers. And then I rode in with, I just walked down to the highway. I had a clerical collar on. I walked down there, and the construction workers helped stop a large black SUV with an FBI agent in it. And I rode into Manhattan with her, and then the rest of it unfolded the rest of that day. But I made it in record time from the time the second plane hit the tower. We were actually coming over this bridge that goes over the rail yards. We were on this bridge when the South Tower collapsed. And so we saw it from that vantage point. And then I was down within 4 blocks of the World Trade Center for an unknown amount for just a short period of time, praying with people and such when the North Tower fell. So that was, people would say, a God thing, that was not normal to be able to, but also going through the Midtown Tunnel at high rate of speed is not normal. So there was a lot of things, but even seeing the people in Manhattan still unaware, going about their business as we went flying by in this SUV, was a very surreal experience for this person.
What's going through, like, I I get like, so when I go to a hospital or I go to a home visit, or I've responded to various situations in our neighborhood with overdose and things like that. And when I'm called upon, or Pastor Hill is called upon to to pray and to be present in those situations, um, my mind is racing, like, and I'm trying to, like, okay, if I'm going to be asked to pray, like, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are the words that I can say to God that these people are going to hear, that are going to do two purposes, right? That are going to communicate, help this person to communicate, and maybe even mediate between them and God, right? As what prayer is. But like, I also want them to hear words that are comforting. And so like, I try to, like, almost like pre-plan what I'm going to pray. Was that happening for you too? Like, knowing, like, or were you just like, I'm going off I have no idea what the hell's going to happen, so I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants and just trust that the Holy Spirit is going to work through this. Like, what's going through your head as you're going into this situation?
When so I'm here with this FBI agent, and she don't know her name, never saw her again, and we're both flying by the seat of our pants because when the North Tower fell, or the South Tower fell, I just said to her, because she's driving, I said, it's gone. And she said, what's gone? And I said, the South Tower just collapsed. And then we heard it on the radio. And she's the one that said, first, she just said to me, because you're wearing a collar, she doesn't know I'm Lutheran and it's not the time
Hmm.
to go through all that. She said, Father, I don't know what either of us is going to do there, but we need to get there. And
Mm.
that was the emphasis throughout that day, because at that time my mouth went completely dry. I
Yeah.
remember very vividly that it's just like, what's going on here? When we were flying down Second Avenue going south towards I got off right by One Police Plaza, the FBI building there and everything. And I kept on thinking that I'm going to see there's going to be an FDNY, NYPD chaplain there, and
Hmm.
I will just do whatever he or she tells me to do. And when I got there, there was one lone, relatively young FDNY or NYPD cop physically just stood there and told people they can't go through. And so the thing was, it was like a beacon wearing this collar that I never had to think, because people came up and just fell into your arms and started crying. And so you pray.
Mm.
Um, Later on, after the tower collapsed and I went over to West Side Drive where they were deploying people, the desire to be blessed was just huge.
Mm.
And so I stood on a Jersey barrier, those concrete barriers, or it was a lower one. And there's just a line. They came up, and it was tradition in New York and on the East Coast a lot, where when you go in and you actually use oil and anoint people. And I had that with me. And I don't even know how many people or how long I was there, but just one after another came up for a blessing. Some wanted to have confession, some wanted to pray. And the nice thing was, after things started, I really didn't have to think too much.
That was the spirit just took over.
Yep.
Spirit just took over. That's incredible. What were the what were obviously there's a lot of fear and terror, and just general probably confusion. But like, when people were asking you for prayer, like, was your prayer just like, what were people asking for prayer for? Like, was it as simple as was it just, you know, Father or Pastor, pray for me, or pray for my family, pray for my uncle, my friend, or whoever was in the tower, pray for them? Or like, what was kind of like, what are the prayer requests? I'm just curious. Like, or was it just like a general prayer, or was there actually like specifics?
Um, a lot of
Yes.
things. One of them, when I was blessing people, the routine was they would come up to me. I would ask them their name, and just because of my personality, you have to know the humorous side. One guy told me his name, and I was like, "You could pronounce that 500 times, I still wouldn't be able to get it right." And he just said, "They call me Joe." I can do that. And so my routine was that I would anoint their head with oil, and then I would put my hands on their shoulders and uh, bless them in the name of the Trinity. And then I would that God would watch over them, protect him as he served that day. It was very quick and all that, because then they would go from me to my left, and there were guys with Sharpies, and so they would take off their gear and write on their arm either a phone number or a social security number or whatever, so that if there was another collapse or anything else that day,
Oh,
that
okay.
they would be able to be identified. So they just kept on moving. One more specific one was we were right at the corner of West Side Drive and Vesey Street, which is an intersection right basically north of where the North Tower had stood. And I saw this figure walking toward me, and just could recognize that he was a firefighter, but because of the debris, kind of like with the smoke that's been in the air, you just couldn't see much. Um, the smoke in the air after the Canadian fires. But I saw him, and he walked up to me and just fell in my arms. He was a firefighter, and he had all this debris in his helmet, and he was just sobbing. He said, "Father, they're all dead. Every
Mm.
last one of them's dead." And so while I was holding on to him, he told me that he and his partner had gotten out of the North Tower before it collapsed. And they had just held each other's hands, and they said, "When you see there's no more people jumping, just yell, go." And he said, we'd been watching and just trying to stay away so we wouldn't get hit by debris or by a person. And then one of us, he said, I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, go. And we were holding on to each other's hands, and we were running as fast as we could. And pretty soon he was gone. And so this man, I didn't realize it for a couple of seconds, but I was the first live person he saw.
Mhm.
And the last person that he saw that died was his partner, and he had to keep running because of the tower collapsing. And he said, "Father, they're just all dead. There's people everywhere, and they're all dead." And just to imagine, for me, looking when after we had hugged for a while and wept, I remember looking into his eyes, and when they say that the eyes are the window to the soul, in that moment, I felt like I was looking in eyes that's really for God. This is not something. This was this was way above who I was, but I could see so much
Mm.
in his eyes that communicated, because he's filthy. He's just completely covered in debris except for his eyes. And we stood there for a while, and then some other firefighters came by and washed his eyes out and stuff. And then fast forward, I don't know, whatever amount of time later, he came by and he put his hand on my shoulder. He says, "You better pray with me again. I'm going back in." And so then again, anointed him, prayed for him, that God would protect him. A lot of it was for protection, because the there were fighter jets in the air, and only people that know military would have been able to reassure us that at least they're all ours. We didn't
Mhm.
know. So there was these fighter jets going back and forth, back and forth. There was a lot of rumors going on. So most of the prayers were for safety and protection. Earlier, when I was with families that were trying to get in to find their relatives, it was for them to be found, for them to be safe, that sort of thing. But then we didn't know it in the moment, but we didn't realize that after the towers collapsed, that basically there were no more survivors. Everybody had died. And it wasn't until that evening that when Building 7, which was part of the complex,
Mhm.
was on fire, but it didn't collapse until about 5:30 that night. It hadn't been struck by either jet. It just had by fire. Nobody died in there. And the hope was that once we could get on the other side of Building 7, that there'd be more recoveries, and there just weren't. There's this whole triage area that was set up to receive the injured, and it never happened.
Wow. That's what was there was something I don't remember where it was, because I was September 11th, I was in 4th grade. That's one of those moments where you remember, like, you'll never ever forget where you were. Obviously
Right.
for you, you'll never forget where you were because you were there. I remember watching on TV. It was one of those things that night we went to church. I went to church with my family. I was like, who goes to church on a Tuesday night? But I remember going to church with my family, and that was all of us just sat and prayed, and there was like almost like a popcorn kind of a prayer where people would pray, and then and then our pastor blessed us and things like that. Um, there was something where there was a pastor who prayed with a bunch of people, and they got like, didn't they get like in trouble because
Oh,
they had the audacity to pray with non-Lutherans or something like that. I don't remember. I might be completely out of line in saying that.
no.
I might be mishearing or misunderstanding. But I thought that he had gotten in trouble because maybe there's a little bit more to it. But what was do you remember? Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That wasn't you, right?
No, it wasn't me. It was my district president.
That's right.
Through a
That's right.
chain
That's right.
of
That's right.
events, he got invited to go to Yankee Stadium
That's
and
what it was.
be a part of whether or not it was a service. Because I mean, when you have that many different religions around and Oprah Winfrey, um, so yeah, he prayed there, and that got him in all sorts of trouble. And good, bad, or otherwise, that he was there and that he prayed and so on and so forth. The beauty of it was that he ended up being the lightning rod
Mhm.
that nobody knew. It was beautiful that nobody knew that I was going down there. I was there for on my day off and stuff. I was at the site about anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, and nobody questioned me or anything because everybody was worried about
Everyone's
David
focused on
Benke's
him.
behavior and being reprimanded and suspended and all this kind of stuff. And there's certainly enough ink that got spilled on that to the part that is still, whether it was my actions, Dr. Benke's actions, or anybody's, is that there's no textbook written on all this stuff.
Right.
Um, I would hope we always use good judgment and remain faithful. But then there's sometimes where it's just like, well, we'll get over this by Monday. It's I'm not excusing, I'm not doing anything for anybody other than saying that I was fine having other people debate all this because I had other things to do and
Yeah.
didn't see, there's elements of it, just we can dissect that, hold a
Yeah.
seminary class for it,
Right. Yeah.
I don't
Seriously.
know. But it was just one of those things that it was going on up at Yankee Stadium. And I think it was started by a bunch of Mets fans or something. I don't know.
No, the only reason that I brought that up was because I don't think I mean I can't speak for you, but I feel like I know you pretty well, and to know kind of maybe what you're thinking when tragedy strikes like that, you're not thinking, oh, is the person in front of me that I'm praying with is he or she and not a Christian? At that point, like I'm still gonna pray for God to be
Yeah.
in this person's life, and it's like you kind of get that tunnel vision, so to speak, where like nothing else matters except for the person that's in front of me. Like for you, I mean, you were probably blessing we're blessing people from that of all different kinds of walks of life, right? People who are coming up to you in that line, right? It's kind of like we say that at the ground is level at the foot of the cross, right? So you've got all these kinds of people. We probably had people from different sexual orientations, you had people from different races, you had people from different religious backgrounds. You probably had, I mean, did you have Muslim, Jewish, all these other, I mean, people that were coming up to you just ask, because at that point they're looking for something. They're just like they need some kind of a comfort. And you're, like you said, you had the collar, right? It was kind of blinking, right, as almost or like a magnet, right? That's like just drawing people to you because they're looking for the man with the collar. They're looking for the man with the answers. They're looking for the man who, it's not theologically correct, but they're looking for the man that has the highest connection to God, right? And so in that moment they're looking to you. And I like to think that if it was me, I would not, like, I wouldn't be thinking about the person that's in front of me. I mean, I would be you know what I mean? I'm not thinking about where they're from and kind of what their beliefs are. I would be thinking this is a person who needs Jesus, and God has appointed me to be that person right now. And so if I'm not, if a person who comes up to me and is outwardly, giving the characteristics of someone who's Muslim or Jewish, right? I might not pray to their God, but I'm going to pray with them to the God that sees them and loves them and cares for them, right? Is that am I right in saying that that's something that wasn't going through your head?
Well, two things. One was that there were rabbis there. Actually, that's one of the humorous times when there was just a little bit of a lull. The one of the rabbis had a big water cooler container and cups, and so and he was Orthodox. He had the tallis and the hat and the whole bit, and but you can't pour and have the cups. So I was giving out cups and helping them and all this stuff. And in a very beautiful accent, he looked at me and he said, "Father, this is the beginning of a very bad joke."
Oh, no.
Priest and a rabbi walk into ground zero.
Oh no. I mean,
So
I feel like you have to have some kind of a sense of humor about it. Otherwise, it's just all tragedy. And
well,
in
yeah,
order, you got to have
when you're
coping.
and that was, and I'll come back to the September 11th specifically, but there was even during the next 9 months working at the site because things happened. Like quick story, we only had porta potties. We didn't have any indoor restrooms, and somebody didn't know it was me in the porta john, and I thought we had another collapse because all of a sudden the porta john was shaking. And when I came out and the guy saw who it was, they were just devastated because they thought it was another firefighter that was in there. So they were harassing one of their brothers. And I said, you know, being who I am, nothing more fun than being harassed. So
Right.
we had a good moment on that. But back to the part that I would ask them their name. The part that was so cool was, there's that old expression, there's no atheists in foxholes. I don't know about that. I just know the people that came up that would sometimes say my baptism name, my
Hmm.
confirmation name. And so I'm like, these are God's people. These
Right.
are Christians
Yeah.
who, whatever their journey has been, at some point they had the sacrament of baptism. They may or may not have been confirmed. And I am using that same name and invoking the same name that was said over them at their baptism. And that was the part that was beautiful. The only part that was kind of interesting was when people didn't speak English.
Mhm.
And so I did hear confession in Spanish, and I only knew absolvate. And he just had communicated to me that he wanted me to hear his confession.
Mhm.
And I said, God here. So there were some language barriers, but as far, I don't know. Because it was very obvious that I was a Christian wearing a clerical. I don't know, like you said, as far as their orientation or where they came
Yeah.
from. And one of the confessions was that, if God gets them through this, not saying that this would only happen, he said, I need to get some things right, including my relationship with my
Mm.
wife. And he said, it's not her fault, it's me. And, so you hear these things. And so it was just at that time, same way during the next 9 months, there would be times where guys were just having a tough time
Yeah.
or women, and you just spend some time with them. There's pastoral moments then there was more time for pastoral moments because we would have time between the recovery of bodies and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my next kind of follow-up question. It was how were the weeks and the months and even maybe even up to even years, maybe this kind of thing sticks with people. If you had somebody that you knew died, or if you're that firefighter that collapsed in your arms and you were in the buildings and things like that. I mean, those are very traumatic events, and so that stuff can stick with you. And so the so this is kind of a two-parter, I guess. You just kind of alluded to it. You had some moments where you were able to talk with people over the course of that time, people who have maybe it's just those feelings of grief kind of just kind of well up. It's kind of, I mean, it's just like anyone else, right? um but for you, like, how did you personally, like, when you got home that night, and in the coming days, like, was there any part of that day that just, like, you just can't get images out of your mind? Like, did that cause you any kind of trauma or any kind of things that, like, you said to God, like, please God, take this away from me? Is there anything that just kind
Both
of stays with you?
um, walking down the street after the tower had collapsed, walking down the street and seeing a plane engine in the middle of the street. There was things that became they helped sharpen the reality as if what you saw, but just you saw things that would be familiar. That is a plane engine sitting in the middle of Park Avenue or
Mhm.
whatever I was on. And you're just not Park Avenue, but Parks. Anyway, um, there was just moments like that, but also especially that the firefighter that night or that afternoon, whatever time of day it was, those kind of things were just blazoned on my memory. But then also some things during the rest of the 9 months. One of them was on New Year's Day. It was just happened that it was the day that we were bringing bodies out of where the Marriott Hotel would have been. South Tower, North Tower, and the Marriott was in between. That was where all the firefighters were being deployed from. So once we got down to that level on New Year's Day, so the rest of September, October, November, December, finally there, the recoveries that were being made from there were firefighters. And so their name is on their backside. There's just ways to identify them. And so we were calling their houses, their firehouses, to have them come over to be a part of bringing their brother out of the pile. And those were memorable on January 1, both because of the sheer number, and a lot of them were
Mhm.
from ladder 118 in Brooklyn. And then at the end of the day, a moment that I was so cared for was we'd put all the after they were examined in the morgue for any preliminary identification and stuff. Then they were put on in a morgue truck and taken over to Bellevue Hospital. And there was two things that fit in with what you were asking, is that nobody left ground zero alone.
Hmm.
Whether it was a body or us, we always walked each other off the site. And when the morgue truck was filled, we would always send a firefighter or a police officer, somebody with them. And as it was pulling away, it was the end of my shift and whatever number of hours I had been there. I turned around and one of the chiefs was standing up by the morgue, and he said, "Father, are you okay?" Or chaplain, he actually said, "Chaplain, are you okay?" And I said, "No."
Hmm.
That having been there for over a month, because there were some other parts of the story in between, but I was exhausted. I was emotionally exhausted because of having people that knew this person. Um, and so I remember we hugged and cried, and uh, that was just so important for me to be cared for.
Yeah.
Sometimes we would just walk each other, whether it was to the subway or somebody to their car. There was just that part. But on September 11th, when I went home, um, I didn't know how filthy I was.
Hmm.
And just so I had to walk up to Union Square, which is in lower Manhattan, but it was where electricity was. So that was where I was able to get a train. So I took a train from there to Penn Station. And there was one other person on the car, which was rare to have that much, even at that time of night. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and I didn't realize yet. I saw that I was dirty, but I didn't know
Mhm.
how bad. I looked at him and he said, "Where were you, Father?" And I said, "Church and Chambers, the intersection." I said, "Where were you?" And he said, "16th floor of the North Tower."
Oh
And that's all
wow.
we said. And so there were those moments that are just as real on this day as they were that day. And then the last one would be is on June 2nd, 21 years ago, Jack, Carlos, two EMTs that I worked with, and myself were there the last day, our last shift. And we actually, when I lived in Albany, Carlos's wife had died. And I went down for the visitation for that. It was the first time I saw those two men after serving together. And our whole theme was being about a greater good, making a
Mhm.
difference, and how important those two men were to me, because for the most part, those were the two guys I worked with the most.
Okay.
But they were just phenomenal men. So that teamwork, it wasn't just like working alone. There's actually about 7 of us that were in the morgue all the time. Firefighters, FBI, photographer, different things. So medical examiner. So there's a lot.
Okay. Well, I had a hunch that you weren't doing it by yourself. I don't know anybody that could do it by themselves. I'm glad to hear that it's that the firefighters and the EMTs, that all of these guys were and gals were taking all the magnitude of the situation into account. And so even little things, I mean, so you said the morgue truck, so like obviously there's a driver, so you just send
Yeah.
somebody with the driver, right, just to ride with them. So like, because that's got to be, I mean, you're the guy that's transporting these bodies to the, I mean, just all, there's just so many things that I don't think everyone fully considers all the time too. And so um I mean, months and months of recovery, right? And figuring out just where everyone is and getting the everything cleaned up. And um, I mean, I don't know how you did it other than the grace and the strength of
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. I mean, that's an amazing testament to what God can do through that, and in the relationships that you have cultivated. Do you still talk to any of those, or interact, or follow it up with any of those guys that
Jack,
you interacted with?
yeah. Jack, Carlos, and I, we had lost touch for years. But then there was just a couple of just quick things. I was at the bar where I became Father Ted for a Wounded Warrior project. I was actually the chaplain for that. And so I'm in the pub getting ready to have an invocation. And I hear this voice and they say, "Chaplain, come here." And so while I was chaplain, and so I went over and they said, "You might not remember us," because we had full face respirators and goggles and hard hats and all this stuff. But you were our chaplain at Ground Zero, and we've been to Iraq. We're back now. We're back with the FDNY. And 2 weeks from now, we're doing this project called St. Baldrick's Foundation.
Mhm.
All of us are getting our head shaved, and so are you. So, this was several years, 2, 3 years after the site was closed, in a bar for a Wounded Warrior event. You have a reunion and you see these people. There was a couple other chaplains we've stayed in touch over the years because we would relieve each other. And one was an ELCA guy that we went through some additional training for disaster response. And so, there was just some of those connections. But Jack, Carlos, and I stay in touch now that we've reconnected.
Yeah.
They're both retired. Jack is into photography, and just the gentlest person you'd ever want to meet.
That's
So
awesome.
Facebook is a gift. Facebook is a
Yes,
nice thing.
yeah, that's awesome. Yes, it is. That's quite. So that's where St. Baldrick's stuff is. That where all your involvement with St. Baldrick's came.
Yep. It was all peer pressure. It was just being shamed in by a bunch of firefighters that are police officers that I was going to do it. And so I started it. I think this was my 16th year. And yep, it grows
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
Mostly.
because you were doing that. You got some of the SEM guys to do that too.
Yeah. We raised at the seminary about $10,000 a year for St. Baldrick's, and everybody from Dale Meyer to Dr. Olowski and some others were participating off and on through the years. And every year we would have anywhere from 15 to 25, 30 guys, and we had a lot of women do it. So Beth Holke, Dr. Holke, she did it. So they braved the bald.
That's awesome. Well, Father Ted, thank you for joining me this morning, and I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that's not even half of what we could have potentially talked about. So maybe that means that you'll just have to come back on, and we'll talk about some other things. But I really appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship. I never knew that when I went to Sidetrack with Adam and Kevin that one night and met you for the first time, that I was going to meet a dear friend. And so I appreciate you. And yes, Facebook is a blessing. And I always look forward to having these conversations. And I hope that at some point we're going to be able to actually sit down and drink a beer together in person. I'll buy.
Absolutely.
You can hold, the listeners will hold you accountable. I will
Hold
buy
you
for you.
accountable.
Yeah, hold me accountable for it. So thanks again, man. I really appreciate your time, and we'll chat soon. We will definitely chat soon.
Thank you, Tyler.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
All right. God bless you, brother. I love you.
Peace. Love you too. Bye-bye.